"You'll never be like Nathan," my dad said, his voice flat, cold, as if the words were just truth. I remember the exact moment. We were in the kitchen. The fluorescent light above us flickered like it was struggling to stay alive, kind of like me standing there, gripping the edge of the counter just to keep from snapping. I just told him I was launching a business. Nothing big, just something I'd been working on quietly for months, something I was proud of. But instead of encouragement, he didn't even blink. He just scoffed. "You'll never be like Nathan," my dad said, his voice flat, cold, as if the words were just truth. I remember the exact moment. We were in the kitchen. The fluorescent light above us flickered like it was struggling to stay alive, kind of like me standing there, gripping the edge of the counter just to keep from snapping. I just told him I was launching a business. Nothing big, just something I'd been working on quietly for months, something I was proud of. But instead of encouragement, he didn't even blink. He just scoffed. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the tile floor beneath my feet. Instead, I grabbed my bag and walked out without saying another word. The air outside was cold and sharp, biting at my cheeks as I stepped onto the porch. I didn't cry right away. I just stood there staring at nothing, hearing his words on a loop in my head. "You'll never be like Nathan." Just a disappointment. I wanted to scream, to run, to throw something. But instead, I reached for my phone. My fingers trembled as I opened the app I'd been building in secret. My little project, my little spark of rebellion. I stared at the dashboard. It wasn't much. A few hundred users, a tiny bit of traction, but it was mine. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not anger, not even sadness, just this quiet defiance, like a whisper that rose from the ashes of everything I'd buried inside me for years. What if I didn't need to be like Nathan? What if I didn't need their approval? What if I just proved them all wrong? I didn't know how. I didn't know when. But I made myself a promise on that porch. One day they'd see me not as a disappointment, but as something they never expected. And when that day came, I wouldn't just walk back into their lives. I'd walk in as their boss. And they'd never see it coming. People think the words that hurt the most are the loud ones. The yelling, the insults, the screaming matches. But growing up in the Carter household, the pain was quiet. Came in comparisons, in glances, in the way love was measured and distributed like it was some limited resource. And I always got the scraps. Our house sat on a hill just outside of town. Picture perfect from the outside. White shutters, a tidy lawn, flowers that bloomed every spring. But inside, it felt more like a glass museum. Pristine, controlled, fragile. There was no room for messiness, no room for softness, and definitely no room for someone like me. Nathan was 3 years older. From the time we were kids, it was clear he was the one. Trade A's, varsity, everything. Handshake like a CEO before he was even shaving. Dad would light up just watching him walk into a room. "See how Nathan does it?" He'd say after every school event, every dinner, every time I tried to breathe. I remember one night, 8th grade, I had just won a small writing contest at school. I was buzzing with excitement, holding the certificate in both hands like it was gold. I walked into the living room, practically floating. "Dad, look what I won." He barely glanced up from his laptop. "That's nice, honey." That was it. No smile, no follow-up, just a dismissive tone and a quick pivot. "Nathan, did Coach get back to you about that scholarship?" And just like that, my little moment evaporated. I stood there, still holding the certificate, my face burning as Nathan launched into a full recap of his day. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, trying to remind myself that maybe it didn't matter. That maybe writing didn't count in our world, but it did matter to me. That moment wasn't the only one like it. My life became a loop of almost almost good enough, almost worth noticing, almost part of the family, but never quite in the center of it. I got used to living in the background. I learned how to shrink myself, how to keep dreams small so they wouldn't be mocked. I became the master of staying quiet when my heart wanted to scream. And Mom, she never intervened. Not once. I don't think she hated me. I think she just didn't know how to go against him. She stayed tucked into her own quiet world. Polite smiles, folded laundry, and too many cups of tea. When Dad said something cruel, she'd flinch but say nothing. Her silence screamed louder than anything he could have said. Till I watched. I learned. While Nathan was being groomed to take over the family business, I was learning something else. How to survive being overlooked. How to observe, analyze, read between the lines. I knew every beat of their routines, every flaw in their operations, every weakness they couldn't see because they were too busy patting each other on the back. I didn't know it then, but every moment I spent in their shadow was preparing me. I didn't need their spotlight. I was building something better, something of my own. They never saw it. They never asked. They just assumed I'd drift off, marry someone who'd handle the money and maybe volunteer part-time. That's who I was to them. Sweet, soft, unambitious Emma. They didn't see the fire. Not yet. But one day they would, because I wasn't just a shadow anymore. I was a storm gathering on the edge of their perfect little world. And the moment I stepped back into their lives, everything they thought they knew about me, about themselves, was going to change forever. The last real conversation I had with my father was the one that broke me. It was about a year after I left home. I'd been scraping by, trying to find my footing. Living in a tiny studio apartment with paper-thin walls and a heater that rattled like it was on its last breath. I was juggling part-time jobs, building my business idea during late nights when the city outside was finally quiet. It was exhausting, yes, but for once it was mine, my life, my work, my mess. And I was proud of every failure because it meant I was trying. But pride can be fragile when it's still healing. And all it took to shatter mine was one phone call. I'd reached out stupidly hoping for support, maybe even just a little encouragement. My small eco-packaging startup had just signed its first real client, a boutique skincare brand. Nothing huge, but it was a win. I was so excited I couldn't keep it in. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, legs bouncing with nervous energy as I dialed the number. Dad answered on the second ring. Emma. Hey, Dad. Got a minute? He sighed, an audible, impatient breath like I was already wasting his time. Make it quick. I swallowed hard and forced a smile even though he couldn't see it. I signed my first client today for the business, the eco-packaging thing I told you about. There was silence, a long, heavy pause. I thought the call had dropped. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. That little project, you're still doing that? I felt my throat tighten. Yeah, it's growing slowly, but he cut me off. Emma, come on. You're chasing fairy tales. You want to play CEO while your brother's out there making real deals? You think someone's going to take you seriously? Every word landed like a punch to the chest. But he wasn't done. This is why I said you should have just worked with us. We had a position open in admin, but no, you always have to do your own thing. You'll never survive out there. My fingers clenched around the phone. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear his voice anymore. Why do you always assume I'll fail? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Another pause, then in the coldest tone I've ever heard from him. 'Cause you're not Nathan. And just like that, something in me snapped. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just ended the call and sat there in the dim light of my apartment, staring at the cracked screen of my phone, feeling everything all at once. Rage, shame, heartbreak, but most of all, this deep rising defiance. He doesn't see me. He never will. But that doesn't mean I don't exist. Night I made a decision. No more half-trying. No more waiting for validation that was never going to come. They weren't going to believe in me, fine. I'd believe in myself loud enough for all of them. I quit one of my jobs, reinvested every dollar into the business, reached out to mentors, joined a women-led founder group, took night classes. I slept less, hustled harder, and I really learned how to build something real. All the while, I kept hearing his voice in my head. You'll never survive out there. He had no idea he'd just given me all the fuel I needed. And he definitely didn't know that I was coming for everything he thought I could never have. The world didn't suddenly open its arms to me after that phone call. There wasn't some magical overnight success, no dramatic montage with upbeat music and a cheering crowd. It was quiet, ugly, lonely, and I loved it. There was something freeing about hitting rock bottom emotionally. It meant there was nothing left to lose. I stopped caring about how I looked to my parents. I stopped waiting for anyone to say, "I'm proud of you." I started asking myself, what if I just became the kind of person I was proud of? I changed everything. I moved into an even smaller place. My studio became a shoebox. Literally, I could touch the sink from my bed. The walls were so thin I could hear the neighbor's alarm clock buzz every morning. I worked 16-hour days, packed boxes myself, pitched clients over Wi-Fi that cut out every 10 minutes. I delivered orders by hand in the beginning, riding the subway with giant boxes, sweating through my clothes, pretending I was totally fine. But underneath all the exhaustion, something wild and electric was growing. Confidence. Real confidence. Not the kind you fake to get through a dinner with your father. Kind that comes from knowing what you're building. And I wasn't just building a business. I was building a future they couldn't touch. I renamed the company Wild Nest Goods. It started as a line of biodegradable packaging, but quickly expanded into full eco-supply solutions for small businesses. I listened to my clients. I learned their pain points. I made changes. I reinvested everything. And I started hiring first freelancers, then contractors, then full-time staff. I built a team of women, of outsiders, of people like me. People who had been told they were too sensitive, too messy, too different to make it. We were scrappy, fierce, and we were growing. 2.5 years in, I was sitting in my tiny office, a converted back room in a co-working space, when I got a text from an old family friend, someone who worked quietly behind the scenes at Carter & Company, my family's empire. It said, "Are you watching what's happening with the company?" I wasn't. I hadn't thought about Carter & Company in months, but curiosity got the better of me. I started looking into it. Turns out they weren't doing so well. In fact, they were bleeding. Declining clients, dated systems, poor online presence, no sustainable options in an industry that was moving full speed into green logistics. And the kicker, their largest supplier had just pulled out, leaving them scrambling. I stared at the reports like I was watching the walls of my old prison crack open. I wasn't happy they were failing, but I wasn't sad either. Felt poetic. Till I didn't rush in. I waited, watched, studied. I wanted to make sure this wasn't a fluke. In the meantime, Wild Nest exploded. We landed 3 major contracts in under 6 months. Our revenue tripled. My team doubled. We got press awards. And then we caught the attention of a major investor. They wanted to partner, expand, acquire. And suddenly I had capital, real capital, enough to do something I never thought I'd do. Buy Carter & Company. Not out of revenge, out of strategy. 'Cause their infrastructure was solid, their reach still wide, but their leadership outdated, arrogant, vulnerable. I ran the numbers, ran them again, brought it to my board, and together we made a decision. We'd acquire the company quietly. No press, no noise, just a transfer of power, and I'd be the one to deliver the contracts in person. I could already picture it. My father's face, my mother's silence, Nathan's shock. But this wasn't about payback. It was about taking back the narrative. I was no longer Emma, the overlooked daughter. I was Emma Carter, the new owner of everything they said I could never build. I remember the way the doors felt in my hands. Solid, cold, heavier than I expected. The office looked exactly the same as it did the last time I'd been there years ago. Same glossy floors, same smell of fresh coffee and polished wood, same framed photo of Nathan and my father shaking hands after his first big deal, still hanging like a trophy in the front hallway. But this time I didn't feel small walking through it. I felt steady, rooted. I wore a tailored navy blazer. Clean lines, sharp shoulders, simple, intentional, no flashy jewelry, just presence, confidence. Every step echoed as I walked through the hallway toward the conference room. I knew they'd all be there. My father, my mother, and Nathan. I'd sent the meeting invitation myself, signed with my new title, Emma Carter, CEO, Wild Nest Holdings, parent company, Carter & Company. No one had responded to the email, but I knew they'd show, and they did. They were seated when I entered, the three of them in a row like some kind of tribunal. Nathan looked confused. My mother looked anxious. My father looked annoyed, arms crossed, jaw tight. Classic George Carter. I closed the door gently behind me and walked to the head of the table without saying a word. For a moment, no one breathed. Then my father spoke. "What's this about?" His tone was already defensive, like I was interrupting his day, like I didn't belong in that room. I met his eyes and sat down, calm, centered. "I'm here to finalize the transition," I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out 2 crisp folders, contracts, printed, tabbed, highlighted. Nathan leaned forward. "Wait, transition?" I nodded. As of this morning, Carter & Company is now owned by Wild Nest Holdings. Silence, then laughter. My father actually laughed, but it didn't last long. He looked at me, suddenly uncertain. "What are you talking about?" I pushed the contracts across the table toward him and my mother. "This is your new employment agreement, both of you." My mother blinked, looking down without reaching for the folder. My father stayed frozen. Nathan, on the other hand, understood faster than I expected. "You bought us?" he said slowly. "You?" I turned to him. The business was undervalued. Too much debt, poor digital infrastructure, minimal sustainability practices. But the bones were good and the brand still had name recognition. So yes, I bought it. I watched as realization settled across their faces like a storm cloud thickening in slow motion. My father's face turned red, but he said nothing. "You work for me now," I added, keeping my voice low even. Not gloating, just true. That was the moment. The moment I'd imagined 1,000 times. And yet, it didn't feel like fireworks. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet, satisfying in a way that ran deep, like a wound closing. My father finally spoke. "You think this means you won?" I looked at him for a long moment. "This isn't about winning, Dad. It's about building something you never thought I could. And now I'm offering you both the chance to stay. If you're willing to work under a new kind of leadership." He stared at me. I saw it then, just for a second, the flicker of guilt, the beginning of regret. He didn't take the contract. He stood up and walked out without another word. My mother reached for hers slowly, hands shaking. I didn't know," she whispered. "I know," I said. And I meant it. Nathan stayed quiet. He didn't apologize, but he didn't leave either. He signed the agreement. I walked out of that office the way I walked in, calm, whole. Not for revenge, not for approval, just for me. When I walked out of that office, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious or smug or even relieved. I felt free. It wasn't some big explosion. There were no dramatic music cues, no slow-mo applause in the background, just the quiet click of the door closing behind me, and this sudden powerful stillness in my chest. It was over. Not the work, not the company, but the war inside me. Part of me that had spent years chasing their validation, begging silently for a seat at the table, finally stopped running. I had built my own table. Over the weeks that followed, the transition was surprisingly smooth. Nathan kept his head down and did his work. I don't think we ever became close, but there was a kind of mutual respect that began to grow between us, strained, unspoken, but real. My father never came back. He refused the offer, retired quietly, and vanished from the company's day-to-day. He hasn't called since. I used to imagine that day differently, him showing up, telling me he was wrong, that he was proud. But that moment never came and I stopped needing it. My mother, well, she stayed not at the company but in my life. She began texting me, asking questions, sending photos of little things, books she was reading, flowers blooming in the yard. Her way of rebuilding something, I guess. One afternoon, we sat on a bench outside my office. She looked older than I remembered, more fragile around the edges. "I should have stood up for you," she said. "I see that now." I didn't say anything right away. I just reached for her hand because I wasn't angry anymore. I understood her silence now, even if I didn't excuse it. Forgiveness isn't loud. It's not always pretty. Sometimes it just looks like holding someone's hand when you don't have the words. The business is thriving now. Carter and Company is no longer Carter and Company. It's been fully merged into Wild Nest Holdings. We rebranded, modernized, built sustainability into every piece of the operation. What used to be a family name that made me feel small is now part of something bigger, something built with purpose. But here's the thing I never expected. Success didn't heal everything. Didn't erase the years of feeling invisible. It didn't rewrite my childhood. It didn't make every wound disappear, but it gave me something I never had before. Perspective. I used to think proving them wrong was the goal. That one day they'd see me on top and regret everything. But I don't want regret. Not anymore. I want peace. I want to look at the mirror and see someone I chose to become, not someone I became just to prove a point. If you've ever felt like the disappointment in the room, if you've ever been the shadow to someone else's spotlight, I want you to hear me when I say this. You are not a failure just because they couldn't see your light. Their vision is not your limitation. Let them underestimate you. Let them doubt you. But don't let them define you. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't yell or fight or break things. It's to grow so quietly, so steadily that one day they look up and realize the world they once ruled now belongs to you. And when that day comes, you won't need their applause. You'll already be clapping for yourself. So that's my story. Not a perfect one, not easy, but real. If you're still here, thank you for listening, for feeling it with me, for walking through the hard parts. Maybe something in it reminded you of your own life. Maybe you're in the thick of it right now and trying to be seen, trying to matter, trying to prove to yourself that you're more than what they said you were. And if you are, let me say this. You are not a disappointment. You are not behind, you are becoming. If this story spoke to you, drop a comment, tell me your truth, or just say, I see you. 'Cause sometimes that's all we need. Like, subscribe, or just come back when the world gets heavy and you need to remember you're not the only one fighting to rise. And remember this. Own your story. Even the parts they told you to hide.